December 1966, and London is swinging. The new beat groups are rocking the charts, Hendrix has just arrived in town, and the miniskirt is all the rage. But tonight belongs to the old school. Arriving in style for the star-studded premiere of their brand new film, Jerry and Sylvia Anderson. Their studios on the Slough trading estate have become a mini Hollywood and a multi-million-pound empire. Their TV show is an international hit. Their movie will be the Christmas film. But the real stars of the night are not people. They're puppets. This is all about Thunderbirds, how Britain's favourite puppet show went from Slough to the stars.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thunderbirds are go.
Whenever we played at Thunderbirds at school, I was always Scott Tracy in Thunderbird 1 and my friend was in Thunderbird 2.
At the time, I didn't think it was any big deal. I just said, well, make the trees fold back.
She's going!
Parker?
Yes, milady.
Our strings touched, and it was like 1,000 volts of electricity went through me.
All the shows that we did before Thunderbirds was like a dress rehearsal for the big one, which was Thunderbirds.
Just 5 years earlier, Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space.
I think it's hard to exaggerate just how exciting space and space travel was to a child growing up in the 50s and 60s. And the reason, of course, is that these are the years of the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union.
Interested in nothing else. I literally used to pray that I would live long enough to see man land on the moon.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
There was enormous excitement about the possibilities of space travel, about rockets and rocket ships and space stations and astronauts and spacewalks, and all of these things would have been everyday elements of a child's imaginative life.
It's just a fantastic place to go, and I always believed that I would go there one day.
I wish I was a spaceman, the fastest guy alive.
When I was a little boy, I was really looking forward to the future. It couldn't come quickly enough for me.
There was a real sense, I think, then that technology was going to change the world and that the pace of change was unstoppable.
50 years from now, home for some 30,000 people could very well be a city like this, built out of concrete and glass 15 miles out into the North Sea.
We're living at a time of such rapid scientific change that our children are accepting as part of their everyday life things which would have been dismissed as science fiction a few years ago.
There'd be manned missions to Mars, everybody be in flying cars.
cars will fly. So that all seemed incredibly exciting. Dad got a new car. Great, but does it fly?
We'd have silver boiler suits. You'd be able to take a Pan Am flight to the moon if you wanted.
I wanted to be a spaceman. I mean, I think every kid did. And Jerry's show has kind of enabled you to be those spacemen.
All my thinking drew me to think of the future.
When they weren't watching rocket launches, kids were expected to make do with some pretty ropey puppet shows. But technology was about to take over here as well. Producer Jerry Anderson had come up with a new way of presenting puppets through a system he christened Super Marionation.
I did this a certain amount of tongue-in-cheek. And as the years rolled by, people in the business would say, are you going to make this one in Super Marionation? And I used to think, if you only knew, you know, but everybody took it very seriously. This was another form of filmmaking.
It was a guy called Mike Mercury, and he had this car that could go, as the song said at the beginning, it could go through space, it could go through the air, along the road, under the water, whatever.
Super Marionation and Supercar. Everything was super, despite the fact that Jerry had never really intended to work with puppets.
I had ideas of becoming what Steven Spielberg is today.
Smoke generator on.
And here I was making puppet films.
Dr. Beaker, we don't seem to have any smoke. No smoke?
But at least Jerry's process was high-tech. He'd come up with a nifty way of making the puppet's lips move.
There was the solenoid which had to be put inside the puppet head, which would operate the mechanism inside the mouth. And the current for that had to come down wires which held the puppets up.
I have a suggestion.
Well, let's have it then, quick.
But I think...
What's the plan, Mike?
Well, Dr. Beaker is going to take the film back to Satellite Films Incorporated.
The bottom lip was hinged.
I get it.
The chin was fiberglass, but left a gap there. And we had to fill that gap with something that would stretch and look as if it was part of the face. The only material that worked were condoms. And the boys used to have a great deal of fun going into a chemist and ordering 20 or 30, you know.
Despite Supercar's advances, there were still some limitations.
We were able to make the puppets appear to do most of the things we wanted. The things that we couldn't do was we couldn't get the puppets to walk.
Walking was the thing that you couldn't make look natural with a puppet. To lift their foot up and put it down, and it just didn't look like a human walk.
So Supercar's futuristic design also served a purpose. It saved the puppets having to walk around. The series was bought by TV mogul Lou Grade. With his investment, Jerry's company brought in some young special effects assistants who couldn't wait to start their own space race.
I think what we were aiming for was excitement and thrills, and that was our goal. So everything we were doing was fast, it was noisy, it was explosions.
Fire one.
Roger, fire one.
To start off with, it was just a bang and a flash. Anyone got a lighter, and Supercar had two stuck up its exhaust pipes, you lit it and run, and that was it. If it burnt the string, it fell off. And the fire brigade used to come out, because the ceiling used to be alight, and things like that. Everything was a little bit trial and error-ish, but we learnt.
Though Supercar was good, it was very starting to get exciting, it was still very puppety. And Fireball, I think, was the first one that took it away from that and made it sort of almost grown up.
Okay, Venus?
Okay, Steve.
Right.
They
Let's
raised
go.
the stakes through each one, and they got more and more technologically clever.
The next series, Fireball XL5, lifted off in 1962. At the controls, a hero who was more Dan Dare than Yuri Gagarin.
Dan Dare is kind of an interesting figure because he's not this incredibly futuristic sci-fi hero. He's actually a really old-fashioned, stiff upper lip, lantern-jawed, Bulldog Drummond style fighter pilot. That sort of biggles for the future, but he's very British and he's very old-fashioned. And I think you see a lot of that kind of appeal in the Lantern Jaw, Jerry Anderson heroes, who are, in some sense, Dan Dare clones.
Like all young men of his generation, Jerry had done his national service. The RAF was a place of scratchy uniforms, stiff upper lips, and great big planes.
To be an RAF pilot, you're kind of following the footsteps of Biggles.
I was at Manston. At the time, it had the longest runway in the country. So it was used for emergencies. If an aircraft had a fault, it would be diverted to Manston because it had this very, very long runway. There were aircraft like Lancaster bombers, and that was a great thrill.
Now listen to what I say carefully. Take over the controls.
But now he was in Civvy Street, the reluctant puppet producer was still trying to find ways of making his pilots look like the real thing.
I never wanted to do what I was doing, and so I was very critical of the puppets and constantly thinking, well, why can't they do this, and how can we get them to do that? I was desperately trying to improve them, trying to make the puppets look as real as possible. I was really saying to the industry, look, obviously I can make live-action films, can't I? But it was all counterproductive because each show was more successful than the last, and so they came back and said, can we have another puppet show? And so I was trapped, typecast.
By now, Jerry was married to one of the production team, Sylvia Tam. As the programmes became more successful, Lou Grade pumped more and more money into the studio.
Fireball XL5 and Supercar had been major successes in the USA. And of course, Lou Grade was really the spearhead behind many of the 60s programmes. I mean, even the adult programmes like The Prisoner and the Saint would never have happened if Lou Grade hadn't actually just said in a moment, let's do it.
Lou Grade cast an enormous shadow because he was very, very big. And he had a big Rolls Royce, and he had a big cigar, and he had big ideas. And the big ideas were very, very global Anglo-American. He was aiming to do from Marble Arch what Americans did in television from LA. He was aiming to make chunks of global TV and sell them worldwide.
The main thing he did was he virtually gave me a blank check to do whatever I wanted to do.
Stand by for action.
With Grade's money, Anderson's ambition to make bigger and better shows was paying off.
If they were selling a show to America, then it was important that it was the latest and it was in colour.
We are about to launch Stingray.
The minute we heard it was going to the States, it had to get better and better.
Although Britain was still watching in black and white, the next series was shot in glorious colour, and instead of outer space, it headed into the uncharted depths of the oceans.
I am calling battle station. Anything can happen in the next half hour.
Stingray was a vehicle, and that was the main character, so me and my friend played at being Stingray all the time. And probably like a lot of boys, I did fancy Marina.
What are these strange enchantments that start whenever you're near?
I think my brother did too.
While Marina was giving new meaning to the words wet dream, Jerry's crew were in their element.
Explosions underwater, you've seen the way that works. You get the explosion, the rocks are dropping down, and we put air lines into the tank, and it's bubbling, and you just blow it, and it gives it that bubbles going up and the stuff coming down. You've got fish, and we had to get scoured fish in foreground, and you had to tap the tank to get them to swim through shot to give it some form of realism. And then and then all the fish flipped off out.
It's a triumph for Stingray, and a further success for technicians at a British film studio. For Parade has been invited behind the scenes of the world-famous television series Stingray, where skillful science deceives the eye and nothing is what it seems to be.
Stingray went into dry dock after 39 episodes. By early '65, Lou Grade was asking the Andersons to create some new heroes.
A brand new television series is about to be filmed. The completed puppets, perfect down to the smallest detail, are handed to the expert puppeteers who will bring them to life on the screen.
We made the pilot film as a half-an-hour show, and I took it to show Lou Grade. In a very loud voice, he said, "Jerry, this is not a television series." Of course, my little world collapsed. I thought, this is the end, you know. And then he walked all the way up to me and he whacked his finger right in front of my face and said, "This is a feature film," which was wonderful. He then said, "You'll have to make them as 1 hour." And I said, "Fine, Lou, but we've already shot 9 episodes and we've got another 3 already written." He said, "I don't care. They've got to be made as an hour."
Each one had to be undone. They had to be enlarged from, about 25 minutes to 50 minutes. Sorry, Scott.
And now all is ready. The director has a final check, and the cameras roll.
Go ahead, John.
We have our first emergency call, Father. The new Fireflash Max 6 atomic airliner is in distress at London Airport.
The Fireflash. Okay, Scott, away you go.
Thunderbird 1 will be underway in 30 seconds.
Boys.
Thunderbird 2 will be right behind him.
Thunderbirds burst onto our screens on the 30th of September 1965.
When all the vehicles get launched, that was the coolest bit.
This whole idea that technology can make life easier, you know, it's easier to be transported on some hydraulic lift into a rocket than just to walk there or climb a ladder.
Hark back to the limitations of the puppets. How do we get the crew to get into Thunderbird 2? Thunderbird 2 is a very high vehicle. They can't walk, let alone climb a ladder or a staircase. Thunderbird 2 rolls along the runway, and somebody said, it's going to be difficult because the wings are going to touch these trees. And I just said, well, make the trees fold back. And they said, oh, that's an idea. They fitted the trees to 2 broomsticks, and a man at the end would have the broomstick in each hand, and he would just rotate the broomstick and the other one, and the trees would both roll outwards.
The brand new vehicles immediately took on an iconic status of their own. Well, boys love that stuff, don't they?
It was when we first got a television, and it was one of the first ever moving pictures I think I ever saw. Thunderbirds really kind of tuned in to what boys liked, you know, at the time. Whenever we played at Thunderbirds at school, I was always Scott Tracy in Thunderbird 1. My friend was in Thunderbird 2, you know, Virgil. In a way, as a kid, I wasn't that interested in the plot. I actually just wanted to get to the vehicles and the explosions as quick as possible.
The end sequence of the pilot, when the plane is landing on the wheels,
Okay, Firefly.
I mean, even now I go cold when I think about it.
Engines. Fireflash, overshoot!
Jerry Anderson was doing what is now only possible with CGI. It's easy to write a scene on a page, but none of that actually exists. It all has to be created. And then it's all shot like live action.
Fireflash, lift port wing! Lift port wing! Cut power!
Nowadays, you wouldn't attempt that without CGI.
Applying maximum brakes.
They made it. They made it! It was so exciting, because you realised that nobody had done this before.
Okay, Scott. Good timing.
Great.
Thunderbirds was made to first feature standard. And when you look at the lighting, the sets, nothing was left to chance. It was just made like a first feature film.
I mean, this isn't handy-pandy any longer. This is something very, very different.
The lavish models and special effects made Thunderbirds the most expensive TV show ever made in Britain. And the hour-long format meant it could offer much more than explosions and rescues.
International rescue. If only I knew their secrets.
It gave it a bit more depth. A half hour isn't very long. You know, if you've got a story that has a beginning and a middle and an end, a half hour, 25 minutes or whatever it is not a long time to get all that established.
And of course, everything stopped for tea.
International rescue. Lady Penelope speaking.
That padding actually gave it the extra dimension it needed dramatically. These stories weren't over in a flash.
You called, milady?
Yes, Parker. Get to the Rolls-Royce. We're going for a little drive.
Complication piled on complication just made the whole thing more suspenseful, more dramatic, and allowed for more interaction of the actual characters to exhibit their own personalities, which was interesting.
The Thunderbirds are not manned by just a group of rescuers. They're manned by a family. And you have that very important core of the stories, is this is about a family. They're brothers. And it's their father who's sending them off on these missions.
Right, Father. Okay, Father.
Sure thing, Dad.
Yeah, Father.
And so there's a very strong emotional core at all of these, in the centre of the stories.
Well, Alan, Tintin, you understand that I have to be here, don't you?
Sure, Dad. Now, if you'll excuse us, Tintin and I are going to play tennis.
With backstory,
Gordon.
with characteristics.
Brains.
They became characters, they became people. You didn't think about them as puppets, they were people.
Okay, Scott, you're in charge. What'll be your first decision? Well, that's easy. I contact John in Thunderbird 5.
Scott was like Mirth, the leader. Had his feet firmly planted on the ground.
What's up, Scott?
Oh, nothing, John. Just wondering how things were with you.
Scott is supposed to be the sort of leader of the pack, aside from the old man.
Now, hold on, boys. I'm still giving the orders around here.
Virgil was slightly artistic, played the piano and painted.
Now, how do you expect me to get a good likeness if you don't keep still?
Then there was lovely Alan here, who was the baby and spoiled.
Right. Laugh this one off.
Hey!
Alan would be a bit difficult to keep in line sometimes.
Gordon, now listen. You've got to locate them within the next 2 minutes.
Gordon spent most of his time underwater. John was up in the satellite.
Come in, John.
International rescue from Thunderbird 5. Hi, Scott.
It was a family. And with all the sort of ups and downs and slight aggravations at times that a family would have to deal with.
Say, where's Tintin got to, Gordon?
Oh, don't tell me you haven't heard, Virgil. Oh, this Prince Charming flew in and is really sweeping her off her feet.
No.
Alan.
Yeah.
Oh, Alan had a terrible time.
Knock it off, eh, fellas?
He was actually in love with Tintin.
They're just friends. That's all.
There was a very lovely naturalness to it, I thought, with that relationship.
Was he as handsome as I am, Gordon?
Nearly, Virgil.
They're overgrown kids, essentially. I mean, we never forget that they're children because, you know, their dad is telling them what to do.
Get moving, boy. A moment's delay could mean the difference between life and death.
These kids are being told to go off and pilot fantastically fast machines and go out and do exciting things. You know, it's absolute child wish fulfillment.
Kids empathised a lot with Thunderbirds because the characters' heads are out of proportion to the body, just like children. It was about 7 years old, and we had a family holiday to Morecambe, and then I realised they had this 30-foot model of Thunderbird 3. I resolved then to actually build my own rocket. I was going to build one of these things. You know, that charged the imagination. A lot of kids grow up and you know, they believe in magic, you know? They believe in, you know, all this Harry Potter stuff. I wanted something more substantial, and I thought through science you can actually make it happen, and very much so with Thunderbird. You know, it could be possible. And it could, you know. Give me a few £1 billion and I could build you Tracy Island, and we could do Thunderbirds for real.
I had a little Thunderbird 2. A dinky Thunderbird 2 where the pod came out.
Yeah, I had one of those.
Thunderbird 4 that you always lose.
You always lose that, yeah.
Because they're so little.
Absolutely right. And I had a Fab 1, the Rolls Royce, and you always used to lose the gun because it used to fire a gun out the front, so that used to go missing.
I didn't realise when I was a kid that most of the Thunderbird's machinery doesn't make sense. Because what you've got is you've got these 3 engines here, and if you've got a slight imbalance from one of these engines, it's just going to tip the rocket. It would be much better if you had 4 engines as opposed to 3. You'd have to have a lot of guidance on there, maybe a reaction control system out the front to, you know, to mitigate any sort of variations in the thrust.
You know, a rocket launching never fails to give me a kick.
It's the hardware, the gadgets, the machines, you know. It's real wish fulfillment, really, for boys.
Where are we now?
These are some of the vehicles that we use when we're out on rescue operations. Now, of course, these are just some of our minor craft.
This was my favourite Thunderbird. You know, it had so much going on. But it would be very, very difficult to get this to fly. One of the problems is these wings. They just point in the wrong way.
Easy does it.
He's down.
As 65 moved into 66, Thunderbirds was one of ITV's biggest shows and a multi-million-pound business empire. It created the first must-have toys. Commercially available products even popped up in the show itself, an early example of product placement.
Now that's a good choice.
Merchandise and magazines were big business among boys. The next job was to find a way of reaching girls by exploiting a minor character.
International Rescue. Come in, please.
Come in, Penny.
They decided they'd devote a whole magazine to Lady Penelope. So we had a call from them, a desperate call, saying, look, we've invested money. Where is the heroine? We only see her at the beginning and the end.
But this was a boys' world, where girls had to use all their feminine wiles.
Oh, Constable, the light's in my eyes.
The only problem was that when the team of writers came in, they never knew how to write for this new heroine. So it was all boys' own stuff and the women sort of bringing the tea.
Now I seem to be quite lost.
Oh, where are you making for?
Well, if you could direct me to the Tower of London.
I always had a battle on my hands, really, to get something into the show that was more than explosions. It took quite a lot of persuasion.
Bowing to commercial pressure, Penelope and Parker were brought forward in the storylines, adding a dash of light relief as well as glamour.
Just a touch of chloroform.
Splendid.
At the beginning of the series, I mean, Parker was actually a minor character because in the credits at the end, his face doesn't appear like Scott and all the others. You've got the Lady of the Manor, and you've got, you know, an ex-convict trying to go straight.
Parker.
Yes, milady. And sassing her all the time. I just think the juxtaposition of the two was made for comedy.
Get the Rolls Royce out, Parker. We're taking Lord Silton to London.
But as writers got to grips with Lady P, she began to develop from comedy subplot to fully fledged action heroine.
You know, I've often felt I'd like to do something exciting, like being a secret agent.
When Lady Penelope and Parker are leading the storyline. The story's become almost more espionage, secret agent based. Obviously, at this time of the 60s, secret agents were hugely popular. From people who had, wealth and class getting involved in dangerous operations. And, Lady Penelope and Parker are kind of part of that world.
Why, Penelope, are you all right?
Oh, at last, Jeff. Those killers are hiding out in their sub. They must be stopped.
There's a sense that they're trying to get into that whole James Bond scene, not always that subtly. There's a character in an episode called The Man from MI5 called James Bondson.
Dear me, you are impatient, Mr. Bonson.
She's a sort of rogue Deb, a modern posh girl, a very rich modern posh girl. She's a sort of composite of all the early stroke mid-60s girls, actresses and pop people. She's a bit Julie Christie, a bit Dusty Springfield. She's that composite 60s girl with big blonde hair and fantastically smart clothes. I mean, couture, but new couture.
This is number 17, called Autumn Crocus.
They were looking very closely at real couture and copying those clothes.
Penelope's glamorous lifestyle and stiff upper lip perfectly suited the mood of swinging London, or people's perception of it anyway.
We're nearly there.
I think they've absolutely subscribed to an American view of Britishness. Why bother with subtleties in something like that? It would be stupid. So you've got posh, upright Brits.
I say, open this door at once. We're British.
And the Dick Van Dykes, working classes.
Jolly good show.
And posh ladies.
Parker will have us out of here in no time.
London may have been swinging, but back in Slough, the Thunderbirds team were hard at work.
And so another scene in the adventures of international rescue is shot at the AP Film Studios in Slough, the safety town.
In the middle of the Slough trading estate, we probably launched more rockets than anybody else in the world.
Derek, how do you evolve the futuristic designs of your models? Well, usually I just start doodling on a pad, and as far as we're concerned, nothing is impossible in the special effects.
It's made by people called Reg and Derek, and yet it's deliberately projecting a completely un-English, un-Slough kind of world. All sorts of glamorous things are made in unglamorous places, and therefore exactly the right place to make magic. Dream Factory should be in Slough.
They were on the beloved Slough trading estate, very romantic setting, not far from the Mars chocolate factory and in the shadow of two cooling towers. Not quite Hollywood, but the nearest thing we'd got.
Backstage, there's a vast empire of scenic design and model making. Everything is custom designed and built to scale. Houses, spaceports, Thunderbird craft, vehicles down to guns and watches.
We had everything that any other film would have. There was a carpenter's workshop, there was a puppet workshop, there was a wardrobe department, there was an editing department. It was a miniature film studio, a miniature industry, if you like. We had everything that anyone else would use when they were making a film.
We did try to keep it within the bounds of what you could do with sheets of perspex and bits of cardboard and bits of wood. And then the trick, of course, was to try and stop it looking like something that immediately someone would stab a finger at the screen and say, oh, I know what that is, that's a ice bucket from Woolworths or whatever. That was where the skill lay, and hopefully some of the time we got away with it. Now I tend to look at some of the sets and think, oh dear, why did we do that? There's an enormous lemon squeezer on the Thunderbird 1 hangar, which is in a very prominent position, and I really don't know why we left it there, but I wince every time I see it.
When you were a boy, were you fascinated by explosions? Yeah, I'm very destructive by nature. I think that's why I'm in the special effects.
It was filmed in the afternoon and blown up, and if it didn't work the next morning when you watched rushes, you made it all again, and that was the daily routine. It wasn't until you watched the rushes the following morning could you breathe a sigh of relief and say, right, I haven't got to rebuild that lorry that was burnt to pieces or the petrol station that was completely destroyed. We hadn't had the technology that you have today. We had nothing but bits of string to pull things along and bits of wires to hang things on. So we weren't missing the magic that today's technology has, but it was more fun then.
She's going!
Ooh, those effects boys must have felt like they had the biggest train set in the world to play with. Nothing was impossible. Apart from making the puppets walk, of course.
It did lead to such things as the jet bikes that the Thunderbird crews had, which obviously was a solution. It looked very futuristic, and we may well have had them in the script anyway, but certainly faced with the problem of getting a puppet to cross a set from point A to point B and get them at speed as well, which was the other thing, then the jet bike was the obvious answer.
Right, McGill.
He gave them a hover bike or a vehicle to go around in. But that's what made it better, so economy becomes a kind of a plus.
You could never get a puppet to pick something up, so we would use real hands, and a lot of the time they were mine.
It's not here.
So we built a little piece of set, you know, a real hand would come in.
You need hands to hold someone you care for. You need hands to show that you're sincere. When you feel nobody wants to know you.
The rendezvous remains as arranged. What's the matter? Didn't you hear the first time? And for Pete's sake, stop playing around with that pen.
Listen, Dempsey, I'm hanged if I'm going to take orders from you.
In March '66, the puppets faced their greatest challenge against real live alligators.
We did have live alligators. We had a massive tank built into our stage, and we built the house, it's going to get blown up, and we got these alligators. These things would swim around, but it'd disappear to go under the water. That's when you got out the tank very quickly.
The man from the RSPCA went, right, now what's this about you giving them electric shocks? And Derek said, well, they won't move. I put them down, they just won't move. So we just touch them with 2 electrodes and it makes them move, but not very much. So he said, what voltage are you using? Derek said, oh, only 12 volts. And he said, 12 volts? He said, these animals have got very thick skins. Try turning it up to 60. Which he did.
Come on. Come and get me. Alan!
Good shooting, fellas.
It was a wonderful experience. We learned the business. I went there not having a clue how a film was put together, and I learned, as we all did. We were all very, very young, 19, 20-year-olds, and we were all brought together to play, really, and we were playing. It was amazing.
Special effects were really in their infancy, and we were years ahead of anybody else. I mean, this little studio in Slough was producing probably some of the finest special effects in the world.
As England lifted the World Cup, Thunderbirds was the #1 children's show. Lou Grade's next plan was to move to the big screen.
Adventure is gold. Danger is gold. Thunderbirds are gold. Now, on the big screen.
To make a movie of Thunderbirds then in '66, it's no coincidence, because it's about 65, 66 that interest in British films and in Britishness in the cinema really reaches its peak. It's in 65, 66 that Bond mania reaches its absolute highest extent with the release of Thunderball.
Thunderbirds A Go was set to be the Christmas film of 1966, with a spectacular premiere in London's West End.
If anyone says to me, an outstanding memory of those times, it would be the premiere of Thunderbirds A Go. Very, very exciting. We had the huge band, we had everybody visiting, and the fans. It was just wonderful.
It was nice to be having that kind of slightly lavish thing to celebrate the film itself. It did us a power of good, I think.
Those floodlights up in heaven, the sky, Piccadilly Circus, it was wonderful.
And they had the band of the Royal Marines on stage, playing the Thunderbird theme. I think I wore a dinner jacket.
We felt that we'd arrived, we did it properly. And it was right in the West End of London. It couldn't have been better. And it was a proper film premiere. But they were puppets.
In the foyer, I stood beside Lou. Well, then he turned to me and he said, Jerry, I can't make up my mind. Is Thunderbirds going to be bigger than James Bond? Well, it was like a dream come true.
A brand new adventure that takes you where you've never been before. Thunderbirds are go.
Unfortunately, the picture failed.
People look back at that film and say, well, that was, the turning point for Anderson's career.
It's New Zoom from Lion's Mane. New Zoom with 3 flavor stages has new picture cards. Start collecting famous cars. There's one free with every Zoom. On sale now.
By Christmas 1966, Thunderbirds had conquered the world. But unexpectedly, the big screen version flopped. It was midway through the second season, after 32 fantastic adventures, that Jerry got the news that the plug was being pulled.
I went to Lou. I didn't even think about it. I was sure he was going to say, there's little to say, Jerry, just keep on making them. Instead of which, he said, it would be easier for me to sell if I had a new series. He felt he couldn't sell more episodes. I think he was wrong, but I allow him that.
He said there is going to be another series and it's going to be better. And we thought, well, hang on a minute. Thunderbirds went to the top and we thought, how can you do better than that?
The finger is on the trigger. About to unleash a force with terrible powers beyond the comprehension of man.
I think by 67 things were definitely starting to change. The Newsweek article on London came out in 1966. We were dubbed Swinging London. And the moment they did it, that was sort of the end. The following year, things turned from that mood, which was pop, to psychedelic and swirly-whirly horrible hippiedom.
The new series also reflected a change of mood.
The tone is set by the opening credits. When you see Captain Black standing in the graveyard at night. And a friend of mine who's now 40-something used to quake behind the settee whenever Captain Black said anything. It was just that sort of frightening voice.
One of you will be under our control.
Well, that sort of thing really didn't come out in Thunderbirds.
Our retaliation will mean the ultimate destruction of life on Earth.
Thunderbirds is about saving people from themselves, almost, because it's people who've gotten into trouble largely through no fault of their own. Captain Scarlet is very much about a threat.
It was a darker show, mainly because of the story.
The planet is being threatened by these invisible aliens who can be anywhere, who can do anything.
There's something always really quite chilling about the way that they did it, because you knew, there they go, that person's, going to be resurrected, but with his mind perverted and turned against the human cause. So these are quite, heavy things to lay on young minds, when you've been used to the jolly rousing march of Thunderbirds.
And the idea that anybody could be taken over by a Mysteron, it's the body snatchers idea, which is probably the scariest of all sci-fi concepts, really.
All the humour, all the light relief, all the kind of the quirky charm of the characters has gone, and we've got this incredibly serious, very grave and very dark world.
The advance of technology continued. The new show took Jerry one step nearer to his dream of creating live action.
Well, physically, of course, the puppets changed. They could now put the mechanism into the body so that the puppets, the mouths worked and the eyes rolled and everything, so the puppets looked like much more human. And they needed to look that much more real for the story to work.
The puppets on Thunderbirds were marionettes. We started to move towards live action with the Captain Scarlet puppets. The heads were much smaller.
I was very pleased, probably naively, because they looked like real people for the first time. But they created very real problems.
Because the head had to be much smaller, the modelling was more difficult. You couldn't put so much character into the face because it was so small.
And it wasn't until you look back, you stand back and look at it and think, I prefer the bigger heads.
Although they look more real, in a way they feel less real because they're not fleshed out with a private life.
Lieutenant Green, I'm outside the Nash Institute of Technology.
I was just asked to do this. SIG, Captain Blue, it's Captain Scarlet speaking. I'm on my way, that kind of thing.
Proceed, Captain Scarlet.
I just did my voice. I didn't really think about his character.
There's not an awful lot, to differentiate them apart from their colours.
Because you're not acting it physically as an actor. You try to just give your voice as much tension depending on the situation as you can.
Cover me with the SPV rocket. I'm going up there after him.
But as far as characterizing, all I did was that voice. And it's not a voice that you can do many depths with.
Take it easy. SIG.
But people liked it.
The next series was in 1968. Joe 90 was aimed more squarely at children, with a 9-year-old boy at the heart of the action.
Yes, Dad. I can't wait to get to the beach.
The puppets were certainly looking more lifelike than they had just 6 years earlier.
Have a nice day, sir.
But Jerry was still longing to work with live actors. So his next offering was a bizarre mix of puppets and people.
Good morning.
Good morning. Lou called me into his office and said, apologetically, Jerry, I don't really think we can go any further with puppets, so I think you better switch to live action. And I managed to keep a very serious face and said, well, Lou, if that's what you want me to do, that's what I'll do. And as I closed the door, I went, wow! And that's how I switched to live action.
We all wanted to work with real people. We all wanted to do live action. We all wanted to do life-size sets.
There were full-size sets, and it was filled with people who could walk. And people who could look at the right direction. And when they spoke, their mouths opened and closed in sync with their dialogue.
Interceptors, immediate launch.
Everything was wonderful and so easy by comparison. So I was absolutely delighted with it.
It was a grown-up world, and Jerry and his crew were over the moon. Meanwhile, another dream had been realised.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Before the moon landed, we didn't really know what it was like. This is the first time we'd ever seen, like everyone else, outer space. It was actually rather dull.
So in the search for adventure, the only option was to send the moon itself into the outer reaches of the universe.
It was wonderful to work with real actors. I mean, particularly on Space 1999, we had guest stars that you would die for. I remember having to design an outfit for Joan Collins.
There in the radioactive wilderness.
Unbelievable. And when I look at the design, it's naff, to say the least, but at the time it wasn't. She was incredible. I've never seen a woman so beautiful. Her legs were extraordinary. I mean, this was really exciting. This was filmmaking.
1,000,000 years of civilization gone. What future do we have now?
Space 1999 ended in 1977, by which time Jerry and Sylvia had split up and their crew had flown the nest, out making their mark on the big wide world.
Members of that team went on to become some of the leading special effects men in the world. Head of BBC special effects for years, special effects on Alien, special effects on Indiana Jones. They're all kids from Thunderbirds, basically.
The boy who loved blowing things up, Derek Meddings, created life-size sets for 5 Bond films. And in 1979 was awarded a Special Achievement Oscar for his work on Superman.
We had quite a good reputation, When it first started, it was always those little puppets and those little things, and it got better and better and better, and yeah, I was quite proud of them.
It seemed that Thunderbirds had been left behind in the long-lost world of the 60s, but the childhood memories were still strong.
And of course you couldn't watch them on video or you couldn't buy the DVD, so we were sitting in this bar just falling about, thinking about the palm trees. How ridiculous. Why didn't they plant those palm trees further out? I mean,
why
it'd have been
they have to move?
Much easier. But, and how great the rockets were. I thought maybe other people would share that excitement. Yeah.
Hi, Benny. Jeff here. The president's in grave danger. Can you look into it?
Virgil, let's go.
FAB.
And I think out of that we thought, well, maybe if we're thinking that's funny and there's a kind of nostalgia for it, maybe other people will.
Well, what we've taken is taken that style of the puppet movement. We actually do that puppet movement on stage. And I suppose it's a send-up, almost because we do it seriously.
That's it. I did it. A brand new formula.
We have 3-foot models, Thunderbird 1 and Thunderbird 2, which we wear on our heads.
It was almost a cult hit instantly. I don't think we knew that there was that nostalgia until we made the show. It very quickly became apparent, that other people shared it.
After 5 years, the FAB show moved to London's West End.
Thunderbirds are go.
We loved it. We didn't think the show was rubbish. It would be easy to do, the terrible spoof version of Thunderbirds, the strings. But actually, we thought it was great. I mean, and we had a great affection for it.
By the early 90s, even BBC bosses had realised there was something going on here.
Tonight at 6 o'clock, Thunderbirds are go once again as BBC Two begins a rerun of the classic puppet series.
There it was, the original episodes back on BBC Two, which I think probably was the first time it had been on in 20 years. And then that was, in a way, somehow I feel like it was the beginning of nostalgic television actually started there. Yeah. And then, all the programmes since about all the other nostalgia. It feels like it kind of started somewhere around there.
A revival of interest in Thunderbirds was fuelled by recent reruns of the series by the BBC. Last Christmas, shops ran out of models of Tracy Island as demand outstripped supply.
It sounds like a job for Blue Peter.
Now then, launch pad 3. First of all, make a surround, which is exactly the same as you've made the surround to your pool.
After it came back onto TV, we noticed more children.
Yeah. But it just got younger.
They just got younger and younger. So, and I guess that's natural. It was always a series for children. Dads now brought their sons.
So of course the show had took on a different life.
On our way, madam.
And another family favourite also took a leaf out of the Thunderbirds handbook.
I was kind of sending up that thing, especially in a close shave where Wallace goes up in a chair and through all these, down these chutes and everything. And gets clothed automatically and Gromit just walks in through the door, you know. It's an affectionate nod, really, towards all that kind of stuff.
These days, the children of the mid-60s really are living in the 21st century, and some of them are out there designing space stations, big cars, and cities of the future. And look what Father Christmas brought one Thunderbirds fan.
I wanted to be Scott Tracy. I wanted to fly into space, you know. So that was, I think that's what's driving me to do this. I'm actually doing this project because I love it, because it's, you know, it's like a calling to me.
21st century technology has also allowed Thunderbirds to take on a life of its own through an invention that even Jerry couldn't have foreseen.
The whole appreciation of Jerry's work is generational. You know, the children that appreciated it in the 60s and 70s grew up and had children, and then the children saw the repeats and became fans in their turn.
You go to these conventions sometimes where they have all sorts of things going on, and fathers will bring their kids. Fathers who've been brought up on Thunderbirds, now they're bringing their kids along.
There's a good message there in Thunderbirds about saving people, helping people. And that is probably why that is the one show that has survived all of the others so much better, because of that message.
Tintin, look. Oh, it's snowing.
I think it's inspirational, and there's a sort of not a naivety exactly, but an innocence about them that, again, reflects the time, I suppose, and I find that very charming. Yeah. I think children still relate to that. Certainly my son, who's 11, can still watch it, and there's no side issue to it.
It's beautiful.
I was 19, working in this studio in Slough, and in the mid-60s, it was great to be 19 in Britain. The Beatles were #1 in every country in the world. England had just beaten Germany in the World Cup final at Wembley. And to be working on such a highly creative, highly imaginative television programme, for me, was really, really special.
40 years later, it's still as popular as it was when it first came out. It's amazing. Acting is generally very ephemeral. I was in Olivier's company, and I thought that was the pinnacle, but I get much more feedback from Thunderbirds.
The books that we had and Thunderbirds, and it kind of promised it to you as a boy, you know, that's what you were going to do when you grew up. And you were probably going to look as handsome as one of those puppets as well. And so life's been a bit of a disappointment since.
Home, milady?
Home, Parker.
Rescue me, or take me in your arms, rescue me. I want your tender charm, 'cause I'm lonely and I'm blue. I need you and your love too. Come on and rescue me. Come on, baby, and rescue me. Come on, baby, and rescue me. 'Cause I need you by my side. Can't you see that I'm alone? Rescue me.
And we've got a rescue for the Thunderbirds next on BBC Two in Attack of the Alligators.